Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, I just want to start with a map to give us a sense of what is the Ottoman Empire, where was it, how did it expand, and what was going on in the Middle East and the Balkans, basically from around 1200 to 1800. And we are going to use this computer program called Centennia, a historical atlas, which basically is mostly actually focused on Europe. And you can use these little buttons to move back and forth to look at how political borders change over time. But we are going to start around the year 1051, which we can see here. At this point, there is no Ottoman Empire. There is, in the Middle East, essentially ruling large parts of Anatolia and the Balkans, is the Byzantine Empire. So the remnants of the Roman Empire, except here they're speaking Greek, though they consider themselves Romans. And if you were to look here in Iran, there's a group called the Seljuks, basically a type of nomadic Turkish group that is ruling large portions of Iran and eventually Iraq too. And over here in Egypt is another group called Fatimids. So already one point here is that there is no united Islamic empire or anything like that. Instead, you have all these multiple different dynasties coming and going, as we'll see, and developing over time. So what we're going to do is zoom in a bit to Anatolia. And what you see here right around 1064 is this kind of creeping orange thing. And that is basically because the Seljuks were Turks. They were nomadic groups that had taken over large portions of Iran from the previous rulers, or various different little dynasties. And there was a lot of pressure. The Seljuk family itself was happy to just rule the major cities and to take in taxes and so forth. But there was a lot of pressure from other nomads, other Turkish nomadic groups, tribes, and so forth, to move, to keep fighting and raiding. And they kind of needed a release valve. And so they kind of pushed them towards the frontier of the Byzantine Empire. And this created a lot of pressure over time, tension between the Byzantines and the Byzantines and the Seljuks, until eventually a sort of a war broke out. And here, basically at 1073, if we were to zoom in one more time, there should be, let's go a bit faster, a battle called Manzikert. And then this was a tremendous loss for the Byzantines, even though they ended up starting the war. They completely outmaneuvered, lost. The Byzantine emperor was captured and carted away or killed. And this basically opened up all of Anatolia to migration of Turkic tribes. As you can see, basically taken over here, islands, the coast. It gets beaten back a bit. The Byzantines managed to regroup and reclaim the coastline here, and eventually the coastline of the Black Sea. But the interior of Anatolia remains essentially a new frontier of Turkish migration and of Islamic migration as well. Here, by the way, 1130, all these little kingdoms over here are the Crusader kingdoms, right? So it's at this moment that we have different crusades, different groups coming from Western Europe, taking over, starting basically landing over here, setting up little mini states, massacring most of the population of Jews and Muslims, and setting up their own little kind of duchies and kingdoms and so forth in the middle of the Holy Land, which is basically southern Turkey today, and the land of Israel, Palestine, and in Syria and Lebanon. So let's go a bit farther. I can see basically for about 2 centuries, there's pretty much stability in this area. There's an outcropping of the Seljuks called the Seljuks of Rum, that is Seljuks of the Roman territories, as you can see here. They have their own court over here in Konya, and they basically are just dealing with different nomadic tribes on their borders. Different times they're expanding, and they're being beat up. Why are they expanding here? It's because the Crusaders ended up crashing into, coming to help Constantinople, and the Byzantines in the process decided to raid it and to loot it. So if we can see here in Constantinople, which is at the intersection of the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara, there's a little Latin empire. The Byzantines were kind of forced to create a new capital in Nicaea, which is today Iznik, and eventually they would go, but this was kind of a mortal blow to the Byzantines. They were lost a great majority of wealth and taxes and so forth due to the Crusader invasion. So you can see here they're already regrouping. The Seljuks have taken over large parts. But right coming up now, if we were to zoom out, the Seljuks disappeared. What is this gigantic gray blob here? And that is ultimately the Mongols. So the Mongols come in, 1254, 1250, by the 1270s, they've arrived in the Middle East, and they quickly basically take out the Seljuks. Now, what this does is two things. Let's zoom in. It not only eliminates all the other power brokers here and the people controlling the nomads and so forth, it also pushes all these other Turkic tribes and tribes of different nomads from Central Asia further and further west, looking for pasture, looking for land. You can see here the Mongols have broken up into many things. And here we start seeing, right here on the edge of what is left of the Byzantine Empire, little emirates, essentially, starting with right around 1316, 1300. One of them is called the Ottoman Emirate. An emir is just a military leader, so think of it as a principality. There's a whole bunch of them. There's one called Germian, Karase, Aydin. We'll talk about these. Here there's a little Armenian kingdom. And basically, the Ottomans initially are just one of these kind of tribal frontier nomad groups. They're moving around, they're expanding slightly against the Byzantines. They have a specific, they're the ones closest to the Byzantines and often ally with them in different ways, but they're also pushing against these other different groups, right? So they eliminate the Karase, they have the Germayan, the Karaman. These guys are stronger. One thing to keep in mind is the Ottomans are the only ones that are able to cross over to the Balkans and take the Balkans very quickly, as you can see. The Balkans becomes their stage for raiding and attacking and gaining prestige. And this all goes well, but right around now, you can see the Byzantines are basically left with Constantinople and a little bit of Peloponnese here. There's a civil war, basically. The Byzantines are, the Ottomans are beat back, and they actually are forced to regroup, and there's a civil war. That's because Timur, let's see if I should get it, around 1400. There's the Empire of Timur, that is Tamerlane, comes in, and he's basically the enemies of the Ottomans, all the other groups that they beat up, ask them to come in and take them out. And so Tamerlane comes in, captures the Ottoman Sultan, brings him back to his capital in Samarkand along with two of his sons. And this starts up a mini civil war in the Ottoman Empire. Eventually they recover, they manage to take back some of the territories, but a lot of these little principalities come back in the meantime. And now, right around here, we're going to see that little blue Byzantine dot at 1453 disappear, and this is when the Ottomans finally decide to conquer Constantinople. Don't know why that happened. Let's keep going a bit. There we go. So basically, Constantinople has now disappeared. It becomes part of the Ottoman Empire. So it actually takes about 150 years from the start of the Ottomans for them to actually take over the major city in their region and to make that their capital. And what we see now for the next 100 years or so is a set of basically massive expansions in different ways. Territorially, basically expanding to Anatolia and further into the Balkans. Faster into Moldavia, Wallachia, the Crimea. So the Black Sea becomes an Ottoman lake. And then there starts over here the start of their major enemies, which would be the Safavids in Iran. And so Safavids end up basically conquering Iran and parts of the Caucasus, and there's a lot of back and forth wars between the two. In the process, the Ottomans also decide to conquer the Arab lands, which were being ruled by a group called the Mamluks. You can see here. And so at this point, the Ottomans also come into possession of Egypt, the Hijaz, basically the part of Saudi Arabia that was habitable, Iraq. They're expanding to Hungary now. This is all under the reign of the famous Sultan Suleiman. And they're also engaging in massive wars around North Africa here. And there is a very short moment in which even this little boot of Italy is taken over. Now there's continuous wars, but it becomes harder and harder basically to continue to expand beyond this extent. You can almost draw a circle with Istanbul in the center and around about 1,000 kilometers in diameter, in radius. And that is basically the extent of the Ottomans. Beyond that amount, it's hard for them to project power. And there's different places that come and go. For example, Yemen is an Ottoman territory, but is very loosely held, and eventually they'll lose it right now. There's a variety of other wars that come and go. Iraq is lost and won back. But right around now in 1645, they start fighting for the last kind of major Mediterranean island, which is Crete. And it takes them a good 40 years, so much longer than before, to conquer it on and off. This was a very difficult war in many ways. And it was very difficult to eliminate the last colonies because they were always able to resupply themselves. So eventually Crete becomes an Ottoman colony. And then right around this is probably the extent, in 1670s is the extent of Ottoman territories, right? So they have North Africa, which is again ruled indirectly, Egypt, which is the breadbasket and probably one of the richest provinces. And then really the major tax areas are the Balkans and then Anatolia. But also there's the Crimean Khanate, which is technically a vassal state, but is also sending a lot of goods and money back to the Ottoman Empire. They essentially are at the gates of Vienna, often attacking it in different ways. But it's ultimately a misplaced attempt to take back Vienna and the start of a new alliance between different forces that leads the Ottomans to a massive defeat around now. And you can see that actually the Habsburgs, who are ruling the orange part here in Hungary, start coming in, taking over different parts. And right around 1701 is the first formal, 1699 is the first formal territory ceded to a foreign power. And this continues basically over the 1700s. We have a variety of now a new foe here in the north, the Russian Empire, which becomes the major enemy of the Ottomans. They're still fighting the Habsburgs over here. And Russia is always sending expeditions trying to take over the Crimea, sending different groups here and there. And the Ottomans are able to hold them back to some degree, and some have some military victories, but they're not a major military force in the same way that they were in the 1500s or the early 1600s. At this point, the Safavids have gone away. There's a new dynasty in Iran. A lot of these places, North Africa, have basically become de facto independent, even though they're technically still part of the Ottoman Empire. You can already see that Russia now has taken over the Crimea in 1782 and is expanding heavily into the Caucasus, which used to be an Ottoman center. And over the course of the 1800s, there's numerous attempts to beat back growing different forces of various European powers. So soon we'll see in 1830, France is going to take Algeria. The Russians are going to continue moving into the Caucasus. And there's various breakaway provinces here and there. One of the most important is Egypt, source of major tax revenue and food for the empire. Arabia, there's a start of the Wahhabi movement and government there. It's beaten back, but it simmers for a while. And over the course of you can see already in the 1850s, now the parts of the Balkans are being taken over the Habsburgs and the Russians, and there's a new independent Serbia and a new independent Greece, initially just in the Peloponnese. And this continues. Bulgaria is now independent. Egypt is technically taken over by Britain. Algeria is part of France, as is Tunisia. And by the 1890s and so forth, more and more parts of the Balkans are lost in a series of very savage wars in the Balkan. And at this point, the Ottoman Empire is left with a piece of the Balkans, like 1914, piece of the Balkan, tiny part of the Balkans now, and basically parts of the Arab provinces. Egypt has been taken over by Britain. Iraq is still held by the Ottomans, as is Syria and parts of the Hejaz, but it's a very curtailed empire. And this, of course, goes down even further during World War II, World War I. The British come in, they take over Palestine, et cetera, et cetera. And by this point, 1920, 1922, the Ottoman Empire is formally abolished. And there's a new republic called Turkey. Greece attempts to take back parts of Anatolia, take Anatolia. This has been back. This is part of the Turkish independence war. And now we basically have the map of the modern Middle East as we know it. There's some things here, Transjordan is not Jordan yet. Palestine is still a British protectorate. Iraq is technically independent. Egypt is a British protectorate, but the major outlines of the nation states we know today are there. There's also parts here that will be eventually going to Turkey or Syria. Now Syria is independent. We have an independent Iraq and Jordan. By now, there's a new state of Israel. And at this point, we basically still have just one British colony in Sudan, probably Cyprus too. But otherwise, we have the formation of the modern Middle East. So what I want you to get out of this map is one, just to think about, one, how long the Ottoman Empire lasted. So we started in the year 1000. We started speaking about the Battle of Manzikert that I'll go over again in 1073. And the Ottomans actually first appeared, not with the first Turkish tribes came into Anatolia, but about 200, 250 years later. And then it took them a while to expand heavily to turn into an empire, as we'll see. And in this way, it's actually basically the longest lasting dynasty. I suppose the Byzantines were the longest lasting empire in general, but for a single family to rule over 6 centuries only basically happened for the Ottoman Empire. What we're going to look at in the next coming weeks is why is it that the Ottomans were able to transform a frontier principality into a major empire, and none of these other little groups that were around 13 in Western Anatolia on the Byzantine frontier were able to do it. And specifically, what was the religious culture? What was the culture of fighting, of war? What did it mean to declare war at that period? And why is it that the Ottomans won out, and how did that shape the Middle East? So until then, I'll bid you adieu.